Welcome to Fame Factor. I'm your host, Sonia Lambert, and today we're diving deep into one of music's most enigmatic figures, a man who didn't just change with the times, he was the times. David Bowie wasn't just a musician, he was a shapeshifter, a prophet, a walking contradiction, and perhaps the most successful liar in the history of popular culture. And I say that with the utmost respect. Picture this. It's 1999, and David Bowie is standing before graduates at Berklee College of Music, receiving an honorary doctorate. What does he tell these aspiring musicians? That authenticity was never his forte. Instead, he says, music represented an imaginative game of what if. This philosophy, he reveals, might explain his exceptional ability to blend seemingly incongruous ideas into a musical synthesis that effectively challenged and reshaped the landscape of rock and roll. But here's the beautiful paradox. In admitting he was a professional liar, Bowie told us perhaps the most honest truth about art itself. Today, we're going to unpack the lies that reveal deeper truths, the masks that expose the soul beneath, and the journey of a man who spent his entire career asking, what if? And then living the answer. Need a quick escape into culture, rebellion, or the minds that rewrote history? Scoob delivers short, bingeable podcasts packed with bold ideas and unforgettable stories. Welcome to Scoob, your AI-powered podcast studio, with over 100,000 plus minutes of high-quality audio and a buzzing community of 50,000 plus listeners across the U.S. love music legends. Curious about cultural revolutions? Or just need a spark of inspiration? Scoob's got you. Dive into the lives of famous pop culture legends like David Bowie, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, and many more. Now, returning to the life of the legendary Bowie, let's start at the beginning of Bowie's revolution. Not his musical revolution, but his assault on the very foundations of how we understand gender and identity. Long before we had terms like gender fluidity or non-binary, David Bowie was living these concepts on the world's biggest stages. From his early career, Bowie exhibited an androgyny that set him apart from the dominant masculinist culture of the British rock scene during the mid to late 1960s. Picture the cover of The Man Who Sold the World. There's Bowie, glamorously reclining on a chaise longue, exuding what can only be described as pre-Raphaelite transgressive allure. This wasn't an accident or shock value. This was deliberate artistic warfare against societal norms. But to understand why this was so revolutionary, we need to step back and look at the historical context. Society has always labeled those who challenge or blur the lines of gender distinctions as monsters. This label was frequently applied to bodies that defy conventional social and legal norms, particularly those that challenge traditional gender binaries. The figure of the hermaphrodite, what we now refer to as intersex individuals, has captivated human curiosity and fear, playing a significant role in challenging the established gender order since ancient times. Michel Foucault noted that by the 18th century, societal anxiety surrounding hermaphrodites had peaked. The figure represented a third gender complexity, a concept which was eventually streamlined into binary terms by medical science by the end of the century. Even as science sought to reduce these complexities to order and explanation, the idea of the monster persisted, continuously resurfacing through the language of abnormal sexuality and psychiatric evaluation. Now enter David Bowie in the 1970s, deliberately positioning himself in this liminal space that society had spent centuries trying to eliminate. His image continued to evolve through hunky-dory, where parallels could be drawn to Hollywood icons like Marlene Dietrich or Greta Garbo. With the creation of personas like Ziggy Stardust and Aladdin Sane, his androgyny adopted a flamboyant sexualized camp style. Bowie's ambiguity defied the era's prevailing rock culture, which was entrenched in masculinity and a prescriptive heterosexual norm. But here's what's brilliant. By inserting elements of femininity, Bowie didn't simply assimilate these traits. Instead, he highlighted the performative and constructed nature of gender and rock music itself. And it wasn't just visual. Bowie's exploration of gender fluidity extended to his vocal performance. Music critic Shelton Waldrop describes Bowie's approach as operatic, embodying multiple gender expressions within a single song. This technique underscored Bowie's multifaceted articulation of gender, creating a unique space where traditional norms were constantly challenged and reimagined. His legacy in this realm is one that illuminated the possibilities of identity as a mutable spectrum, perpetually advancing the dialogue around gender and expression. He was doing the work of gender theorists, but he was doing it in sequins and platform boots, making it irresistible and undeniable. If the 1960s were about breaking down walls, the 1970s were about figuring out what to build in the rubble. And standing in that wreckage, like some beautiful alien surveying the damage, was David Bowie. To his fans and contemporaries in the 1970s, Bowie was what the Beatles had been to the generation before, a seismic force of transformation signaling the advent of a new era. He epitomized the zeitgeist of the time, embodying the disillusionment and socio-cultural upheaval that marked the decade. In contrast to the 1960s, a time noted for its exuberance and ideological shifts, the 1970s emerged as a more austere and troubled era. The optimism of the swinging 60s had faded, and in its place were tones of dissatisfaction and disconnection, sounds that Bowie captured perfectly with his music. During this period, Bowie became a beacon of resistance against the societal norms of the time, inviting audiences to journey with him into an uncharted world. This world was characterized by a daring defiance of conventions, especially concerning gender and sexuality. While the 60s were often associated with the message of free love, Bowie proposed another form of identity and boundary revolution. He toyed with his sexuality and appearance, embracing a form of queerness before it became widely recognized or accepted by the public. Whether wrapped in a homemade spacesuit or adorning theatrical feminine clothing, Bowie blurred the lines of masculinity in 1970s Britain, and in doing so, he endeared himself to a generation finding its way through similar confusion. For many, especially those ensnared in the monotony of uninspiring small-town lives, Bowie was not just an artist, but a liberator. Through his music and ever-evolving personas, he conveyed the reassuring message that they were not alone, that their uniqueness was something to be cherished. Each of his albums was a revelation, an invitation into his experimental soundscape. Not all experiments were universally successful, but such was the understanding with Bowie's work. You lived with and learned from his artistic risks. He was a restless spirit, much like the modern world he inhabited, a world drifting away from its historical moorings, uncertain of its destination. But here's where Bowie gets really interesting: his spiritual dimension. Mark C. Taylor remarked that religion is most compelling where it is least obvious. Applying this insight, Bowie's music emerges as a non-traditional yet poignant exploration of spirituality. While not overtly religious, his work occasionally touched on themes related to divinity and existential reflection. Take "The Man Who Sold the World," which includes the line, "God is a young man too," subtly inflecting a theological undertone. In moments of profound public expression, such as his performance with Queen at the 1992 Freddie Mercury tribute concert for AIDS awareness, Bowie's dive into spirituality was more explicit. After performing Heroes, he knelt on stage to recite the Lord's Prayer as a tribute to those lost to the disease. His 2003 album, Reality, was released as Bowie pondered the changing perceptions of the world. He expressed concern over emerging complexities, evidenced by a universe without absolutes, a sentiment exacerbated by the post-9/11 landscape. In his mind, the contemporary reality was governed more by contingency than definite truths, and it was this uncertainty that fascinated him. Without the guidance of old gods, Bowie suggested that humanity face the choice of succumbing to chaos or seeking solace in the comforting familiarity of past paradigms. Bowie's exploration of existential and spiritual topics often took on a prayer-like quality, akin to the works of fellow artists Tom Waits, Nick Cave, and Leonard Cohen. However, the lamentations within his music often seem to merge with an underlying skepticism, amplified by his known penchant for obfuscation and layered storytelling. He famously claimed that his role involved telling lies, a possible metaphor for the subjective quality of perception itself. Now we come to one of the most fascinating psychological case studies in rock history. What happens when an artist becomes so immersed in their creation that they lose track of where the art ends and they begin? This is the story of how Ziggy Stardust didn't just become David Bowie's most famous character. He nearly consumed the man who created him. Ziggy Stardust was initially conceived by David Bowie as an artistic expression and a performative persona, a character to be played by Bowie, not a transformation into him. In a 1973 interview with BBC's Nationwide, Bowie described how he meticulously portrayed his character throughout the process, emphasizing that Bowie was more of a concept than an actual person. This abstraction extended not only to Ziggy Stardust, but also to the persona of David Bowie himself. For Bowie, a pseudonym for David Jones, both Ziggy and Bowie were roles to embody, blurring the lines between his identity and the characters. Think about that for a moment. David Jones created David Bowie, who then created Ziggy Stardust. It's personas all the way down, like some kind of existential nesting doll. Audiences became captivated by this interplay between performance and reality, where the songs and emotions portrayed on stage were a theatrical construct meant to push against conventional interpretations. As Bowie constructed what he called a composite rocker figure, a sort of Frankenstein's monster, on stage, the boundaries separating David Jones from his alter ego began to blur, not only in the eyes of the audience, but also for Bowie himself. His fanbase often conflated the real Bowie with Ziggy Stardust, a phenomenon fueled by Bowie's decision to name his backing band the Spiders, a nod to their fictional counterparts introduced on his albums. As he assumed the persona in various public interactions, be it interviews, stage performances, or media engagements, the distinction between Bowie and his characters became increasingly indistinct. The demands of a relentless touring schedule organized by his management company, Main Man, along with his meteoric rise to fame, exacerbated the confusion between Bowie's true self and his on-stage character. By 1973, Bowie had added another layer to his artistic identity with the creation of Aladdin Sane, further complicating his persona. This evolution signaled Bowie's status as a rock myth, an amalgam of real and invented personalities whose boundaries continually shifted. Over the next decade, Bowie perpetually reshaped his identity, eager to explore new terrain in music and culture. By 1974, he openly questioned whether he was creating his characters or if they were manifesting themselves through him. Think about how terrifying that must have been, to lose track of who you are when everyone around you is telling you that you're someone else, someone you invented. By the mid-1970s, the distinction between his real self and these fictional identities had become nearly irreparable. Ziggy Stardust, in particular, proved to be an overwhelming presence in Bowie's psyche. The character consumed him, fostering an obsession that transcended normal boundaries and clouded Bowie's perception of self. By 1993, reflecting on this period, Bowie admitted to Pete Frame the profound difficulty of disentangling his identity from that of his alter ego. The character of Ziggy had become a seamless, albeit destabilizing part of his existence, further complicated by Bowie's indulgence in various substances that blurred reality. Rather than dissociating from Ziggy, Bowie found himself merging with the persona, resulting in a personal and psychological struggle that would later be described as a drug casualty. This fusion of identities ultimately led Bowie down a path of self-destruction, challenging his sense of individuality and self-awareness amidst the complex mosaic of characters he had brought to life. It's a cautionary tale about the price of artistic authenticity. Sometimes, when you stare into the abyss of your own creation, it stares back and decides to move in permanently. If Ziggy Stardust was Bowie's brightest star, then The Thin White Duke was his darkest hour, a character born from pain, addiction, and a mind pushed to its absolute limits. This was Bowie at his most dangerous, both to himself and to his reputation, creating what he would later describe as his most morally ambiguous persona during one of the most controversial periods of his career. In 1975, at the Academy Awards, the atmosphere was electrified with the presence of David Bowie alongside John Lennon. Bowie, adorned in a grandiose black Spanish hat and an emphatic cape, struck an image reminiscent of a figure from the House of Wax. His appearance was akin to a stylized version of Vincent Price, exuding drama and charm that captured everyone's attention. During this time, Bowie was personifying the Thin White Duke, a character who manifested his darkest pop persona. This figure was characterized by a dispassionate and morally ambiguous demeanor, a chilling caricature that emerged as Bowie was contemplating a return to Europe. This persona mirrored what the Germans referred to as kalte Pracht, or cold splendor, evoking the haunting elegance of silent film legends from the 1920s. Bowie acknowledged the influence of Buster Keaton in a Rolling Stone interview, particularly Keaton's great stone face, and the art of the mime or clown with static expressions. These were elements Bowie embraced, creating an enigmatic image onto which fans projected their interpretations. But here's where things get complicated and dark. The line between the Thin White Duke and Bowie's true self, David Jones, became increasingly blurred. Bowie himself suggested that these crafted characters played a significant role in dictating his actions, aligning his behavior with their traits. However, there's speculation about whether this served as a veneer, masking questionable judgments, intellectual pretenses, and cocaine-fueled chaos. On the set of The Man Who Fell to Earth, directed by Nick Rogue, Bowie's personal struggles intertwined with the character of Thomas Newton, an alien. Off-camera, Bowie's own despair and substance abuse mirrored the alienation of his on-screen persona. Reflecting on this time in 2000, Bowie described Rogue as a brilliant individual, but lamented the experience, expressing a retrospective sorrow for his younger self, who endured profound pain and solitude, exacerbated by drug addiction. Bowie humorously noted that while Rogue skillfully merged the personal and cinematic facets of his actors, he also capitalized on Bowie's vulnerable state, quipping, "But he did pay me for abusing me." It was during this period that the most controversial moment in Bowie's career occurred. The series of incidents surrounding David Bowie during the mid-1970s created a perception that he was losing touch with reality. One notable moment was when he suggested in an interview that he would make an excellent Prime Minister of the UK due to his potential for being both dictatorial and mad. Then came May 2nd, 1976, when he returned to the UK after a 2-year stay in the United States. At Victoria Station, where Bowie was to meet a crowd of enthusiastic fans, he arrived in an open-top limo with a mysterious legacy. It once belonged to a South American dictator later assassinated. There is shaky archival footage from that day showing Bowie standing in the limo, waving and smiling at the crowd. In a fleeting moment captured on film, Bowie briefly raises his arm in what seemed like a quick, straight-arm gesture. Critics speculated whether it was an actual Nazi salute, a casual wave, or even a gesture akin to John Lennon's peace sign. The evidence is inconclusive at best. Bowie fan David Burbage wrote in the fanzine Z Douang Provence that none of the tabloids covering Bowie's arrival mentioned any Hitler-like gesture. Only the Daily Mail noted a different salute, describing it as a clenched fist. Reports of the alleged Nazi salute originated from the NME, which ran a photograph of Bowie with the caption "Heil and Farewell." Gary Webb, who would soon become known as Gary Numan, was there that day. He recounted that although he didn't see Bowie directly, given the crowd's size, he doubted the allegations. Reflecting on Bowie's recent return from Germany, he suggested the media may have been seeking controversy. Webb reasoned that with numerous images taken rapidly with a motor-driven camera, a salute could easily be perceived at some point during a wave. Alan Franks, a playwright, songwriter, and Times writer, interviewed Bowie in 1995 and remarked on his troubled period during the mid-70s. Describing Bowie as deranged at the time, Franks alluded to Bowie's struggles with addiction, particularly hard drugs and alcohol. According to Franks, these dependencies likely contributed to suicidal tendencies and depression. He suggested that the controversies, including the alleged Nazi salute, were outcomes of Bowie's struggle with addiction, leading him to act unlike his true self. Bowie's behavior during this period was attributed to the effects of mood-altering substances, rather than a deliberate expression of fascist ideology. It's a sobering reminder that genius and self-destruction often walk hand in hand, and that sometimes the masks we wear to protect ourselves become the very things that threaten to destroy us. Interested in stories that reveal what happens when love, ambition, and art collide? Scoob is where you will find such stories about pop icons like David Bowie, Madonna, Kanye West, and more. We don't just tell stories, we dissect them, scene by scene. With over 100,000 minutes of audio and 50,000 plus devoted listeners, our AI-powered podcast studio brings you the moments where legends are made and unmade. In this next chapter, the chaos doesn't fade, it just changes shape. Because behind David Bowie's early rise was a woman who lit the match and then watched the fire dance. Behind every great man, they say, is a great woman. Behind David Bowie in his formative years was Angela Barnett, soon to be Angela Bowie, a force of nature who would help shape the Bowie we came to know, even as their relationship combusted in spectacular fashion. By March 20th, 1970, David Bowie had entered into married life. He and Angie tied the knot at the Beckenham Registry Office. Surprisingly, no family was initially invited to the ceremony, yet Bowie's mother, Peggy, showed up after notifying the press herself. The wedding party was notably late due to oversleeping, already a sign of the unconventional life ahead. For Bowie's part, he asked John Cambridge to serve as a witness to this significant life event. However, as Bowie was ready to sign the register, his mother, Peggy, intervened and signed instead. Bowie reportedly glanced at John with a shrug, conveying an apologetic, "Sorry, mate, what can I do?" Sentiment. The couple's attire for the wedding was anything but traditional, and it was a preview of the aesthetic revolution to come. Angie wore a second-hand, striking purple and pink floral silk dress, purchased the previous day at the Kensington Antique Market. Meanwhile, David showcased his unique style with permed, shaggy hair, tight leather trousers, a sleek black satin shirt, and an Afghan coat, making a bold fashion statement. Instead of exchanging conventional wedding bands, they opted for Peruvian bangles in a brief but memorable ceremony. The night before the wedding was spent together with a mutual friend, while the following evening was dedicated to celebrations at a pub. Even their wedding was a performance piece. Angie's impact on Bowie, while difficult to measure due to the mythologization in her autobiographies, Backstage Passes, 1993, and Free Spirit, My Teen Early 1980s, was substantial. Behind the scenes, she actively promoted Bowie's talents, engaging with record companies, helping design costumes, suggesting creative ideas, and immersing herself in the music business. Her role in nudging Bowie toward a more flamboyant personal style is often highlighted. Known for her bold approach to outrage and bisexuality, Angie often rocked shorter, edgier hairstyles than her husband, marking an unconventional presence. In the years before Angie's influence, Bowie's image was comparatively restrained. Many contemporaries suggest that his notorious sense of style emerged largely during his time with Angie. She persistently encouraged him to embrace bolder designs, including the checkboard jacket featured on the hunky-dory cover, which belonged to her. During the transitional period between managers Ken Pitt and Tony DeFries, an 18-month span sustained largely by royalties from his first hit single, Angie's involvement was crucial in transitioning Bowie's career to new heights. Initially unfamiliar with the intricacies of the music industry, she swiftly adapted, making pivotal industry contacts and drafting an agenda for the Haddon Hall habitus. She was, in many ways, Bowie's first manager in spirit, if not in title. But like many intense creative partnerships, their relationship was marked by a mix of affection and animosity, which eventually gravitated more strongly towards mutual dislike. Angie's presence in the Bowie camp elicited divided opinions. Ken Pitt, Bowie's manager, reportedly harbored a strong dislike for her. Similarly, producer Gus Dudgeon found her persona challenging, labeling her as a typical groupie and considering her loud and insincere. Despite these criticisms, Angie's polarizing influence is an indisputable part of Bowie's early journey, as she was instrumental in propelling his career and shaping his iconic public persona. She was the catalyst that helped transform David Jones into David Bowie, and David Bowie into an icon. But catalysts, by their very nature, often burn out in the process of creating something new. Their marriage would eventually crumble under the weight of fame, addiction, and incompatible personalities. But its impact on music history is undeniable. Sometimes the most important relationships in our lives are the ones that teach us who we are by showing us who we're not. One of the most revealing episodes in Bowie's career wasn't about his music or his personas. It was about his reaction to seeing his own influence reflected back at him through another artist. The story of David Bowie and Gary Numan is a fascinating study in artistic insecurity, influence, and the strange relationship between original and interpretation. David Bowie was evidently displeased with the emergence of someone like Gary Numan, perceived to be a similar version of himself, sharing the spotlight. Bowie dismissing Numan from an event was akin to Bowie being ousted from an Anthony Newley special in 1967, highlighting his emotional vulnerability. The student had become the teacher, or so it seemed, and the teacher didn't like what he saw. The irony is delicious when you think about it. Here was Bowie, a man who had spent his entire career borrowing, adapting, and transforming influences from every corner of culture. From kabuki theater to German expressionism to American soul music, suddenly uncomfortable with being the influence himself. Nonetheless, in a 2000 interview, Bowie contradicted Numan's account of the situation, branding it as mythical. He stated, "If he were asked not to come onto the set, it would have been during rehearsals. I do remember having told the studio people that he was welcome to come to the actual shoot. He never appeared." Additionally, in the same Q magazine interview, Bowie acknowledged, "I think he's written a couple of the finest things in British pop." So, which is the truth? Maybe both, maybe neither. With Bowie, truth was always negotiable. In 1981, Gary Numan made the notable decision to cease live performances, drawing comparisons to Bowie's own retirement of his Ziggy Stardust persona in 1973. While these parallels were evident to many, Numan insists it was not an attempt to emulate Bowie's narrative. He argues that enduring media hostility compelled his withdrawal, and the label of being a Bowie imitator compounded his difficulties. Despite this, Numan prevailed and exerted significant influence independently, exceeding any replica of the original. Sometimes the student does surpass the teacher, not by copying them, but by taking their lessons and running in a completely different direction. Numan's rise may have indirectly spurred Bowie into revitalizing his music career. Consequently, Bowie's next endeavor became more approachable, reflecting a revamped and visually appealing image. Before heading back to New York in February 1980 to record a new album, the first since the Station to Station album without Brian Eno's participation, Bowie engaged in two meaningful recording sessions. On the Kenny Everett New Year's Eve show, minus Numan's presence, Bowie performed a raw, acoustic version of his 1969 hit, Space Oddity, featuring only an acoustic guitar, drum, and bass. It was as if he was stripping everything back to remind people, and perhaps himself, where it all began. Another notable appearance was on Saturday Night Live, where Bowie performed 3 songs with his band, joined by performance artists Klaus Nomi and Joey Arias. Bowie, aware of the burgeoning video age, crafted distinct looks for each song, turning the performance into a multimedia art piece. During The Man Who Sold the World, he was carried to the microphone in an outfit resembling a cardboard coat. This performance was an homage to Hugo Ball's 1910s act at Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, where Ball would be transported to the stage in a similar tube. Bowie noted in 1999, "I combined the tube device with another Dada costume, that of a highly stylized men's evening dress with huge shoulders and bow tie." For the performance of Boys Keep Swinging, Bowie utilized television antics to attach a puppet body to his head, which flailed humorously, simulating impossible acrobatic movements. This concept was inspired by German fairgrounds, where performers dressed in black would appear as human-headed marionettes by placing a puppet's torso and limbs below their chin. In TVC 15, Bowie donned drag for the first time in over 8 years, in an outfit resembling a Chinese airline stewardess's uniform. A pink poodle, with a TV monitor in its mouth, broadcast the song, embodying a half-machine, half-animal concept. The Gary Numan episode reveals something profound about artistic influence and anxiety. Every artist fears being replaced by someone younger, hungrier, and perhaps more purely representative of the thing they pioneered. But what Bowie learned, and what made him truly great, was that influence is not about ownership. It's about planting seeds and watching forests grow. If David Bowie's story was a movie, Berlin would be where our protagonist hits rock bottom and then slowly, painfully climbs back toward the light. It's the chapter where the man behind the masks finally starts to remember who he is, or at least decides he wants to find out. During his time in Berlin, David Bowie gradually transitioned from a state of paranoia to rediscovering his humanity. Renowned music producer Tony Visconti remarked on the profound transformation he observed in Bowie, noting that he appeared more stable and content during this period. He was in good spirits. And aside from working on his music, Bowie developed a fulfilling personal life as well. He formed new friendships and had the companionship of fellow musician Iggy Pop, who had also moved to Berlin. Additionally, Coco Schwab, a close collaborator and confidant of Bowie, lived nearby, offering further support. Social outings to clubs, where they enjoyed a few beers and good company without overindulging, also played a role in Bowie's newfound equilibrium. The group mingled with a variety of artists and musicians, including Edgar Froese of Tangerine Dream, enriching the cultural tapestry of their experience. They explored East Berlin, crossing through the famous Checkpoint Charlie, and visited places like the Bertolt Brecht Theater. Fine dining was also part of their regular routine. While Iggy Pop maintained his fitness with lengthy daily walks, Bowie immersed himself in painting and recording. Despite this newfound sense of normalcy, Bowie still faced unexpected challenges. Recounting his experiences from the 1980s, he described occasional unsettling moments when objects in his room seemed to move despite his sobriety. It took his 2-year tenure in Berlin to truly cleanse his system, a testament to just how far down the rabbit hole he'd gone. Although Bowie lived a less sheltered and isolated life now, this new version of normalcy was partly a fresh narrative for the media, a unique selling proposition that set him apart. By the late 1970s, interviews in prominent publications like the NME and the Daily Express began to portray Bowie as someone who was rediscovering himself and shedding past facades to reconnect with the human experience. In conversation with journalist Jean Rook, Bowie expressed a daily effort to become bolder, striving towards normalcy and genuine engagement with real people. He recounted contemplating drastic changes when feeling overwhelmed. For a man who had spent years being extraordinary, the quest for normalcy was perhaps his most radical transformation yet. Bowie's decision to relocate to Berlin was pivotal in pulling himself away from the grips of addiction and rekindling his enthusiasm for music. Unlike most artists, Bowie thrived in unconventional environments. Having grown weary of the overfamiliar landscapes of London, New York, and Los Angeles, Berlin's unique tension called to him, providing the creative friction he craved. He described this period as one where the city's uneasy energy sparked his creativity, since he struggled to write in serene settings that lacked stimulating contrasts. Contrary to any notion of reclusiveness, Bowie was as engaged and vibrant as his friend John Lennon during the late 1970s, when Lennon also retreated from the limelight without withdrawing from life entirely. Berlin, with its somber and divided atmosphere, infused Bowie and his music with a fresh perspective. The city's stark realities influenced the sound and theme of his new musical projects. For his subsequent album titled Heroes, Bowie reunited with nearly the same team that worked on his previous collaboration with Brian Eno. The album, recorded during the summer of 1977 at the Hansa Studios in Berlin, sought to capture the essence and sound of the Berlin Wall itself, harnessing the city's charged and dynamic energy to enrich his music. Imagine that, making music that captured the sound of division, of separation, of a city and people split in two. Only Bowie would think to make art from such pain, and only Berlin could provide the canvas. Berlin saved David Bowie, but perhaps more importantly, Bowie saved himself in Berlin. Sometimes you have to go to the edge of the world to find the center of yourself. If the 1970s were about Bowie the alien observer, and the late 70s were about Bowie the recovering human, then the 1980s were about Bowie the conqueror. But this conquest required perhaps his most radical transformation yet, becoming, for the first time in his career, genuinely mainstream. Between 1981 and 1983, David Bowie underwent a profound transformation during a period of seclusion, which prepared him to embrace the burgeoning pop-light era with enthusiasm. His last album before this change, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps, marked the end of his contract with main man RCA, providing him the motivation to conquer a larger market with his next endeavor. This period also followed the shocking death of John Lennon, reminding celebrities everywhere, much like the 1969 murder of Sharon Tate had, of their vulnerability in the public eye. Bowie, who had long integrated the concept of stardom into his artistic identity, often felt beleaguered, despite adopting alter egos like Ziggy Stardust and the Thin White Duke as protective facades. His global appeal had attracted a number of peculiar admirers, who typically indulged in harmless fantasies, as suggested by the book Starlust by Fred and Judy Vermerel. Nonetheless, since his adolescence, Bowie linked fame with mortality or deterioration, a connection evident in songs like Rock and Roll Suicide and his well-known fears of flying or staying in high-rise hotels. He believed that his career helped establish rock and roll as a layered persona rather than a mere genre. But now, in the 1980s, it was time to see if David Bowie could work without the layers. In March 1983, during a press conference at the opulent Claridge's Hotel in London, Bowie shared his vision for dominating the 1980s. He expressed newfound comfort with his age, feeling at ease in his mid-30s, a previously foreign sense of stability. For a man who had spent his career running from himself, stability was the ultimate artistic challenge. During his re-emergence in 1983, Bowie presented a healthier self with a bronzed complexion, bleached hair reminiscent of scrambled eggs, and a perpetual smile. This transformation mirrored his appearance in the mid-1970s with Young Americans, seemingly ignoring the punk rock revolution of the interim. Beyond simply a makeover, it was a strategic retreat to simplicity, safeguarding himself from the complex personas of the past decade. This conservative approach mirrored a desire for longevity unfamiliar since his early career in the 1970s. Bowie continued to evolve, securing lasting health and vitality. He adapted even his lifestyle choices, including changing his cigarette brand, an emblematic move to ensure his well-being. His decision to resurface with the Let's Dance album and an accompanying world tour in 1983 showcased a revitalized artist poised for continued success, assertively managing his destiny in an ever-changing world. The album was his biggest commercial success, but some fans felt it was his biggest artistic compromise. Here's the thing about the 1980s Bowie. He gets criticized for selling out, but that criticism misses the point. This wasn't about selling out. This was about an artist who had spent 15 years exploring every possible version of himself, finally asking, "What if I just tried to be successful?" And the answer was, he could conquer the world. Moving into the digital age, Bowie's ventures extended beyond music. He embraced the internet revolution in the late 1990s, launching BowieNet in 1998, and even entering the online banking sphere with BowieBank.com in 2000. Once again, Bowie was ahead of the curve, seeing possibilities that others couldn't even imagine. The 1980s taught Bowie that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is become exactly what people expect you to be, and then find ways to subvert those expectations from within. While other rock stars of his generation were struggling to understand CD players, David Bowie was already living in the internet age, literally. His venture into cyberspace wasn't just prescient, it was a full decade ahead of what we now consider normal artist-fan interaction. This is the story of how Bowie didn't just predict the future, he built it. Envisaging a transformative era in communications, David Bowie pioneered by delivering the first online-only single from a major rock musician in 1996. Think about that date, 1996. Most people were still figuring out email, and Bowie was already treating the internet as his primary creative medium. By 1997, he delved into the realms of CD-ROMs and cybercasts of his concerts, recognizing the internet's potential as a direct communication channel to his fans. He saw it as an expansive, interactive adaptation of the late 1960s Arts Lab concept, capable of sharing wide-ranging ideas, music, images, messages, writings, reviews, and artworks. If his financial innovation exhibited through Bowie bonds positioned him as a shrewd capitalist, then his ventures in online technology revealed him as a visionary. He anticipated a shift in music creation and distribution towards ubiquity, prompting a quest for uniqueness. While record executives were still trying to figure out how to stop people from sharing MP3s, Bowie was already designing ways to embrace the sharing economy. On September 1st, 1998, Bowie launched BowieNet, an internet service provider that embodied his conceptual vision. This ambitious platform allowed users to navigate the web through an intricately designed David Bowie website, equipped with new technologies like Flash. Visitors gained detailed insights into Bowie's extensive career history and could explore a comprehensive archive of his photographs, videos, diaries, and audio tracks. The members area, rich with chat rooms, forums, and message boards, provided an interactive space while also offering Bowie-approved recommendations and links to other sites. It was social media before social media had a name. Within BowieNet, there existed a journal where Bowie, or perhaps a stand-in, communicated in a cheerful and neighborly tone reminiscent of his early 1970s Mirabelle magazine columns. The plans were grand, transforming the site into a hub for news, sports, and entertainment, where users could acquire their own BowieNet email addresses. The venture extended further, proposing a Bowie bank and credit card embellished with his image. Ideas that flirted with a big brother-like oversight, yet illustrated Bowie's futuristic vision. BowieNet portrayed a science fiction-like world vision, in which individuals relied heavily on online platforms for everyday interactions. Bowie foresaw a future where lives could revolve around and be enriched by such digital entities, fostering a global community of interconnected minds, places, and experiences. While the internet at that time existed in its nascency, Bowie's predictions about inventing new identities and celebrities using new platforms to share their thoughts, both trivial and profound, were spot on. In a 1999 interview with Jeremy Paxman on Newsnight, Bowie articulated his beliefs about the internet's potential impact on society. He expressed his conviction that the transformation would be both significantly beneficial and potentially detrimental, stating, "I think the potential of what the internet is going to do to society, both good and bad, is unimaginable. I think we're actually on the cusp of something exhilarating and terrifying." This reflected his acute awareness of the technological shift that was underway and the profound dual-edged implications it harbored for all aspects of societal interaction. Here was Bowie, in 1999, essentially predicting everything from social media addiction to online radicalization, to the creator economy, to digital identity theft. He saw it all coming because he understood something fundamental about human nature that others missed. We don't just use technology, we become it. And if we're going to become our technology, then someone better be thinking carefully about what kind of technology we're building. BowieNet was ultimately ahead of its time, too early for widespread broadband adoption, too complex for the average internet user of 1998. But it was a perfect example of Bowie's career-long philosophy. Leap first, look later, and trust that by the time you land, the world will have caught up to where you were jumping. As we reach the end of our journey through the many lives of David Bowie, we come to perhaps his most powerful transformation, from living legend to eternal mystery. His final video for the song Lazarus portrayed him bound to a hospital bed with bandaged eyes, evoking stark symbolic imagery, suggestive of resurrection and reflection on life's transience. Through visuals and recurring themes, Bowie appeared to critique religious institutions, suggesting that genuine pathways to the sacred were obstructed by institutionalized pretenders. Bowie's 2013 album, The Next Day, marked a bold comeback after a 10-year hiatus. Released in an era of digital leaks and constant pre-launch promotions, the album caught the world off guard with its unanticipated debut. Its leading single, Where Are We Now?, delved into themes of nostalgia and temporality, reflecting Bowie's introspection on mortality. The song and its corresponding video depicted Bowie as a man adrift in time, pondering existential questions reminiscent of philosophical inquiry. It was as if he was finally asking the question that had been implicit in his entire career. After all these transformations, where are we now? Who are we now? When examining Bowie's multifaceted creative journey, one encounters his various alter egos, Ziggy Stardust, the Thin White Duke, Major Tom, and Aladdin Sane, each embodying a distinct exploration into new musical territories. These personas underscore Bowie's chameleon-like nature, allowing him to continuously redefine the boundaries of music and identity. But here's what makes Bowie's legacy so enduring. He didn't just change with the times. He showed us that change itself could be an art form. In a world that increasingly demands authenticity, Bowie proved that authenticity might be the most artificial concept of all. He taught us that the self is not something you discover. It's something you create, over and over again. His 1999 admission at Berkeley that authenticity was never his forte, that music represented an imaginative game of what if, became his most authentic statement. This philosophy explains his exceptional ability to blend seemingly incongruous ideas into a musical synthesis that effectively challenged and reshaped the landscape of rock and roll. Bowie described himself as a non-musician, focusing on utilizing his acquired skills to innovate the content and boundaries of rock music by integrating diverse genre influences in surprisingly effective ways. He was a curator of possibilities, a collector of futures, a man who understood that identity is not fixed, but fluid, not discovered but designed. Throughout his career, David Bowie challenged every assumption we had about music, about gender, about identity, about celebrity, about art itself. He was the monster that Michel Foucault wrote about, the figure that challenges conventional categories and forces us to expand our understanding of what's possible. From his early challenge to gender norms, through his various personas, from his spiritual explorations to his technological prophecies, from his darkest addictions to his brightest reinventions, Bowie lived a dozen lifetimes in one career. He showed us that the future doesn't happen to us. We create it, moment by moment, choice by choice, persona by persona. And perhaps that's his greatest gift to us, the understanding that we are all capable of reinvention, that we are all entitled to multiple lives, that we are all allowed to ask, what if, and then live the answer. In the end, David Bowie didn't just predict the future. He gave us permission to become it. And in a world that seems increasingly uncertain about who we are and where we're going, that might be the most valuable legacy any artist could leave behind. The chameleon may have changed his final skin, but the lessons of transformation live on. And that's where we are now. From digital dreams to final reinventions, David Bowie's journey was never just about music. It was about the power to transform, to imagine, and to become. At Scoob, we don't just revisit legends, we uncover their lessons and invite you to live them. With 100,000 plus minutes of immersive storytelling and a passionate community of over 50,000 listeners, Scoob delivers the insights and inspiration you need to shape your own narrative. Ready to explore more stories that challenge the ordinary and ignite your imagination? Tune in anytime, anywhere, only at Scoob. No fluff, just bold stories that move you. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the many lives of David Bowie. Remember, as Bowie himself might say, we can be heroes, if just for today. But more importantly, we can be anyone we choose to be, for as long as we choose to be them.